Hello, Web Summit, what's up? That is sad. I came all the way from Brooklyn. Web Summit, how are you this morning? Bom dia. Bom dia. Okay, well, I want to start and really talk about a story. I don't know if you remember this. Not in my face. This, what I'm about to show you. I don't know if you remember. People talked a lot about it in 2017. It was like the thing, you know, there was like a Kardashian or a Jenner who gave a Pepsi to a cop, and it came at the height of all the political unrest that was happening in the USA. It was after the Women's March, it was after the protests against police brutality, and it was laughable. It sparked outrage. And even Martin Luther King's daughter famously said, you know, if only daddy would have known about the power of Pepsi. Pepsi really claimed to unite people. It was a symbol of bringing people together. That same idea of a brand bringing people together and kind of shepherding the future of what could be continued in 2018. If you went to a marketing conference in 2017, you saw a lot of the Pepsi ad. If you went to a conference in 2018, you saw a lot of this ad, the Colin Kaepernick ad. And again, it was all about Nike's alleged commitment to ending systemic racism and police brutality. Interestingly, though, only 45% of the people that actually viewed Nike positively after watching this actually believed Nike was genuinely committed to ending racial justice. So even this spot, a year later, after the Pepsi spot, didn't land as well as you might think, although it generated some revenue, of course, for the brand. This idea of brands standing up for causes and standing up for ideas bigger than themselves has always been. You know, Tom's one-for-one model famously, you know, gives shoes to kids in need. But oftentimes you don't really recognize that actually doesn't provide significant change for the communities it aims to serve. And even Tom's have come out and said this, that this promise of we're gonna give shoes away every time you buy a shoe from us actually doesn't deliver. The hard truth is that people's problems are almost always a lot more complicated than just the lack of an inexpensive consumer item. It's actually more complex than that. And that's a bit of what I want to talk about today. When virtue is weaponized, how companies, how brands are masquerading as NGOs, and what happens, what can we do, and what's the alternative? Just by way of introduction, I work at this company, as was said, SYLVAIN. You can check us out. We do strategy and design and innovation. We think a lot about these concepts. We work with a lot of big companies. And actually, that's where I want to start, okay? Companies, corporations. If you go back and you think about the origin of the corporation, it's actually what you call ancient Roman term meant to speak to persons united in a body for a purpose. And actually the ancient Romans, who really started the modern concept of corporations, all that really were people coming together, mobilizing their resources to spend to support the local communities. So they would create, they'd spend on aqueducts and education systems, and it was actually called a collegia. That was the original concept of what a corporation was, and that went on, funded by the publicani, what was then called the publicani, which were, again, people pooling their resources to support the community. The origins of the corporation were actually inherently about public service. This concept around PepsiCo and all these new brands actually perverts the idea. Early corporations' socially beneficial activities were not simply for public relations, but were the very reason for their continued existence. Corporations were about the public good. They were, in fact, extensions of governments in a way. Over time, that all got fucked up. Over time, private investors got involved and began to pervert that very, very pure concept of the publicani. And it went on and on for centuries until mass media really took it by a hold and accelerated the profit interest. But public interest was always a key part up until the mid 20th century. You know, the Pony Express, which was in the late 19th century, is a great example of a mass media company that served the public good. It allowed people to distribute messages from coast to coast. It connected California to the East Coast. In fact, people learned about the death of Abraham Lincoln, the president, 7 days after it happened, which was like a miracle. They thought it was like an unrivaled technological feat. The Pony Express was a very, very, very big deal because of that link to public interest, and that continued. FDR relying on mass media to continue and perpetuate the interest of the public good. Colgate-Palmolive and Procter & Gamble creating soap operas, again, to serve the public via mass media. That went on, all the way until television in the 1950s, which really exploded consumerism as we know it. And it was all about companies putting forward a promise that they can change your life. They put forward these images that seemed unreachable, and it was tugging at an emotional heartstring. Meanwhile, the corporate interests continued to grow. The motivation around profit continued. Milton Friedman in the 70s famously said, "Profit above all else." So I just gave you a couple hundred years history of companies, and it really culminated in the 70s, where you saw the height of the profit interest with the height of the social, emotional message in advertising. And that was reflected in this ad. Another, not Pepsi, it was Coke. I'd like to give the world a Coke. And it was this very wholesome message. But again, it was about the public interest and about the profit motive. Why? Very simply, we as consumers flock to promises of virtue. We want to feel good. We want to be around ideas that really warm the social code. It says something about ourselves. And there's a financial interest in that. 82% of consumers prefer brands that have values that align with their own. The 3 times growth seen by purpose-driven companies versus their own competitors. 47% have stopped doing business with a company because of its words or actions about a social issue. Virtue and our need to be attached to virtue, to buy a pair of sneakers because we believe we'll go somewhere else, is actually wired in our brain. It's actually evolutionary for us to be attached to virtuous concepts. It's called the helper's high. So when you do something good, if you buy a Patagonia jacket, you actually get a spark of endorphins in your brain. Your heart rate races. You feel alive. It's an evolutionary compulsion to be attached to brands that do good, and that's why you see it. And that's why you see these commercials that really tug at the heartstrings. In the US, we have this commercial. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's from the 90s. It's got a Sarah McLachlan song in the background. It will make you cry. This commercial will make you cry. And it's all about, animals that are hurt and, they're looking to raise money. And that's tugging at the heartstring, really trying to bring you in with this idea of virtue. And this, of course, again, I'm going to do another historical lesson if you allow me. This promise of virtue to sell in a concept has been seen before, and it's certainly through the colonialism and the rise of the European empire around the world. It was this civilizing mission that really began with Christian missionaries that had a promise to save the souls of people around the world. From Christopher Columbus to others, they were using their mastery, their technology to claim to bring holiness to other parts of the world, when really there was obviously another intention. When the missionaries arrived, the Africans had the land and the missionaries had the Bible. They taught how to pray with our eyes closed. When we opened them, they had the land and we had the Bible. Virtue, it was the mask for sort of a predatory behavior. And that went on for centuries in other conquests around the world. The most virtuous are those who content themselves with being virtuous without seeking to appear so. And that's what Plato said. Can you really believe these brands when they're performing virtue on the Super Bowl? I mean, can you really believe that that's actually as pious as it seems to be? Especially when many of these brands are at the epitome of hypocrisy. Many tech brands, here we are in the center of technology. Nextdoor, for example, will loudly claim Black Lives Matter, you're not alone, everyone should feel safe in their neighborhood, but has also, meanwhile, received a lot of criticism for the inherent biases in their own platform, and actually how they've gone the extra mile to take down messages tied to Black Lives Matter. Or you look at Spotify, in their public advertising, going out of their way, and Spotify is a client, so I hope they're not in this room. Spotify, who goes out of their way to say, to really support musicians, to say that they are fully aligned with musicians, but there's a lot written and there's a lot of activity among musicians that are really fighting that alleged commitment. Or you think about Amazon, who famously was meant to sponsor the Seattle Pride Parade, which is a very performative moment. Amazon stands for, marriage equity, when in reality, that actually got taken away by the organizers of the event because they did their research and they realized that there were inherent things within Amazon that actually questioned question their commitment to same-sex marriage. So these brands are performing, and it's virtue, again, masking a predatory behavior. And I think of that as hollow advocacy, sort of empty promises. And what does that mean? What does that mean when you have these empty promises? What does that mean when you see predators who are out to seek your money, to seek control, masking themselves in advertising and messages of warmth? And they're positioning themselves as martyrs, as working on behalf of the public good, when in fact, the corporation was actually based on the public good originally. Today, I question whether that's not true. And so I take a step back and you think, what are these corporations really doing? What is that about? And I think it's actually psychological. If you think of corporations as citizens of the world, like citizens among us, they actually have psychologies. And there's actually a term for this. It's called communal narcissism. It's the concept that you want to be seen as good, but actually it's really all about your own ego and your own agenda. And communal narcissism is a famous concept that was introduced by a guy named Johann Gebauer. Communal narcissists believe that they are particularly advanced in communal matters, but they are not. And I argue that the corporate agenda and corporations are actually communal narcissists. And I think you know what I mean by communal narcissists. It's around in our political lives all the time. And I wouldn't dare mention or refer to any famous American politician to make the point that maybe we all know what communal narcissists is about. They're around. So communal narcissism is a key psychological concept, and I want to break down the 4 things that define a communal narcissist. 1, grandiosity, where brands believe that only they have the power to save the world. They have a sense of superiority. They lie to appear impressive and grandiose. And you could think of that very recently with Elon Musk and the Twitter acquisition, but certainly around SpaceX. Like, I'm going to get everybody to space. Don't worry. I got this, y'all. I'm going to take care of us. I'm going to take us to space. That was a grandiose kind of commitment and promise. Entitlement, that brands believe they deserve your admiration. I deserve special treatment. You should pay attention because of my alleged commitment to an idea. The rainbow logos are, a lot. 3, fantasy. I am the most caring. Brands will go out of their way to really make proclaim their high self-image, where they say and position themselves as that we are for everyone. We are unabashedly good, wholesome. Or 4, the lack of guilt. How can I do anything wrong? How? I've been around, I've taken care of you. That is a communal narcissist. And if you look at some of the corporations and some of their activities, you look at Adidas and it's the termination of the relationship with Kanye, that was really sort of like, how would we ever fall into this trap sort of vibe? So these to me are the hallmarks of a pathology that corporations have called communal narcissism: grandiosity, entitlements, fantasy, lack of guilt. So that's a lot of negativity, of course, but how can corporations stop weaponizing virtue and overcome their communal narcissism? And I think there are a few ways. I think there are a few ways that I've seen brands do it that gets me excited, that gets me believing that these corporations can return to the responsibility of taking care of the public good. The brands that actually critique themselves, the brands that are not apologetic, that are vulnerable and say, we fucked up, we made a mistake, this is what we did. They release full, transparent reports and criticism of themselves, like Ace and Tate did right here. Or they choose wisely. They pick the causes that are inherent to what they actually do. You think about, let me get over here. They pick the causes that are very important to them. So Bumble famously created an AI to end the distribution of unsolicited nudes online. They had the right to play there. It tied inherently to their mission, and it didn't feel like, okay, an e-commerce platform is at the Seattle Gay Pride Parade. And then they actually serve the public good, like the Publicani that I talked about in ancient Rome. The corporations that actually, in their business model, they serve the public good. This is Too Good To Go, an amazing platform that really aims to eliminate food waste. And it's a for-profit venture. It's a for-profit venture that aims to eliminate food waste. This takes me to Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, who famously said a year or two ago, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to society. Without a sense of purpose, no company, either public or private, can achieve its full potential. So if you think about the history, you think about the corporation in ancient Rome, you think about the collegia onto the publicani, and then you think about the era in the 20th century where consumerism was at its height. Mass media really crippled our sense of understanding of the role of the corporation, and the profit motive took over. I am excited about this next chapter, where these brands, the ones I mentioned, the Ace and Tate, the Bumbles, that they actually exhibit behaviors that are exciting. They critique themselves out in the open. They choose wisely. They pick the causes that feel inherent and endemic to the actual business that they're in. And they serve the public. That to me is a true return, a true promise of what the next generation of corporate life can be, the next generation of marketing can be. Returning to the core idea of a corporation, persons united in a body for purpose. My name is Alain. Thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the conference.